They didn't start calling him slow because of the war. Vietnam just gave them new words for an old habit. On the western edge of a fire support base carved out of red earth and elephant grass, a young rifleman lay behind a row of sandbags, his cheek resting lightly on the stock of his M16. The world around him moved in jerks and bursts, boots on planks, ammo cans clanking, somebody swearing at a jammed M60. But his rifle stayed still. His name was Daniel Rourke, but in the platoon they called him Half-Click, not because he couldn't shoot, because he wouldn't. When the rest of the men ran mad-minute drills, emptying magazines into the tree line at dusk, Rourke fired 3, maybe 4 rounds. Slow, measured shots. He'd pause, let the sights settle, breathe, then squeeze. No flinch, no rush. The others would slap fresh mags in with grins, brass scattered at their feet like golden confetti. Rourke would pick up his handful of casings and drop them in an empty C-ration can. Half-Click, you know it's an automatic, right? War's not gonna wait for you to take a nap between shots, man. They meant it as a joke, but it carried an edge. In Vietnam, speed meant life, at least in their heads. Fire first, fire fast, volume of fire, suppression. Put enough lead in the jungle and maybe the jungle would stop shooting back. Rourke didn't argue. He'd just give a small half-smile, the kind a man wears when he's already had this conversation too many times, and go back to cleaning carbon from his bolt carrier with a piece of cloth cut from an old t-shirt. At night, the fire support base breathed like a living thing. Generators hummed, radios crackled, the occasional flare hissed skyward, hanging over the perimeter in washed-out white. Beyond the wire, the jungle pressed in, black, wet, and patient. From his fighting position on the western berm, Rourke had a clear view of the concertina wire and the stakes driven into the earth at uneven intervals. Claymore mines faced outward, their stamped warning, front toward enemy, gleaming faintly when a flare lit the field. Someone had spray-painted a crude skull under one of the signs. It made the younger men laugh, but it didn't make anyone sleep easier. On that particular night, a warm, heavy wind blew across the base, carrying the smell of damp soil, diesel fuel, and wood smoke from a village they weren't supposed to know existed. The sky was low and clouded. No stars, no moon, just darkness pressing down. Inside the nearest bunker, a card game rattled on. Laughter rolled out with the cigarette smoke. "Hey, Half-Click," someone called from the doorway. "Try not to fall asleep between rounds if Charlie shows up, yeah?" More laughter. A few heads turned to see if he'd react. He didn't. Rourke shifted his weight, settled his elbows into the sandbags, and kept scanning the tree line. His right hand rested just behind the trigger guard, not on the trigger, never until it mattered. To the men in his platoon, discipline of fire was something you wrote on a chalkboard in training, then forgot in the first real contact. In the jungle, fear chewed through doctrine faster than termites through rotten wood. Men fired because they were scared, because darkness felt like an enemy, because silence felt like a trap. Rourke had grown up where silence just meant work wasn't done yet. Back in the flat fields of Kansas, before the draft notice showed up in his mailbox, he'd spent long summer evenings laying prone in dusty rows of corn stubble, with a .22 across his arms, waiting for a groundhog to step out far enough for a clean shot. Wait too long and it slipped back down the hole. Shoot too early and you missed, wasted the round, spooked the rest. His father had only said one thing the first time he rushed a shot and hit nothing but dirt. "You don't pull the trigger 'cause you're bored, Danny. You pull it 'cause the shot's right." That sentence had followed him farther than any letter from home. On the berm, a flare popped and drifted overhead, turning the world into grainy black and white. The jungle edge appeared for a few seconds. Fronds, trunks, tangled vines. No movement, no figures, no muzzle flashes, just the hint of a low trail cutting across a dip in the ground, nearly invisible unless you'd spent enough time staring at this same patch of darkness. Rourke saw it. His squad leader didn't. "Looks clear to me." the sergeant muttered, leaning on his M16. If they were out there, they'd be shooting. Rourke didn't answer. He watched the trail disappear as the flare burned out, committing its angles and curves to memory. People moved along paths. Paths told stories. In Kansas, they belonged to animals. Here, they belonged to men who preferred to fight invisible. Behind him, someone yawned loudly, exaggerated for effect. Wake me up when Half-Click decides it's okay to shoot back. They thought his hesitation came from fear. They joked that he froze up under pressure, that he was afraid of wasting ammo, that he didn't trust his own rifle. The truth was simpler and harder to explain. He didn't trust panic. He didn't trust the feeling that made your finger act faster than your brain. Artillery boomed faintly in the distance, somewhere beyond the hills. Green tracers arced far off to the east, someone else's fight drawing lines across someone else's sky. In the west, where Rourke watched, there was only darkness and the sound of insects. He blinked slowly, forcing himself to stay relaxed. Tension ruined shots. Breath controlled recoil. Discipline conserved lives. He believed these things the way other men believed in luck or religion. Quietly, without speeches, it was just how the world worked. On the logbook near the bunker entrance, each fighting position had a note beside it. Number of men, primary weapon, sector of fire. Next to Rourke's name, someone had scribbled a joke in pencil. Slow trigger, fast excuses. The platoon had laughed when they saw it. The sergeant hadn't bothered erasing it. Hours from now, when the jungle finally erupted and the base realized just how low its ammo stacks could get, that note would look different. Men would remember the one rifle that hadn't panicked, the one shooter who'd waited, watched, and then chosen a target that no one else even knew was there. But for now, on that quiet, heavy night at the edge of the Vietnam War, Daniel Rourke lay behind his sandbags, listening to the insects and the distant rumble of someone else's artillery, and refused to pull the trigger just to prove he could. The jungle didn't hate them, it simply didn't care. By the time the sun punched through the morning haze, the platoon was already moving single file along a narrow trail carved by feet that didn't belong to Americans. The air hung thick with moisture, heavy enough that every breath felt borrowed. Cicadas screeched overhead, a constant metallic hum that made it impossible to tell whether someone whispered 2 meters behind you. Rourke walked near the middle of the column, the worst place for a man who preferred to think. The front dealt with what came first. The rear watched what followed. The middle absorbed everything else, the nerves, the impatience, the jokes told too loudly to hide fear. "Half-Click, you awake back there?" A voice from up the line, too loud, too careless. He didn't answer. He placed each step deliberately, heel to toe, feeling the ground through the sole of his boot. The jungle had rules. Step wrong, and twigs snapped, leaves crackled, birds scattered. And the enemy listened. They always listened. The point man raised a clenched fist. The column froze. Not stopped. Froze, as if the vines had reached out and turned them to stone. Rourke lowered his rifle, resting the barrel lightly on a crooked branch, and scanned the tree line. Shadows layered upon shadows. Ferns dripped from branches like torn cloth. A faint path cut to the right, disappearing behind thick bamboo shoots. To the untrained eye, it looked like any other gap in the vegetation. To Rourke, it was a doorway. Something had moved there. Not an animal. Not today. The point man slowly crouched and extended 2 fingers towards the path. The squad leader whispered into the radio handset, his voice thin and controlled. A few men behind Rourke clicked their safeties off. The distinct metal tong sound echoed louder than it should have. Then someone breathed too hard, too fast. A burst of automatic fire ripped from the trees, stitching the air above their heads. Leaves shredded. Bark flew. The platoon dove for cover, some hitting the dirt so hard their helmets bounced. Rourke did not fire. He pressed himself behind a rotted stump, feeling its rough texture through his sleeve, and let the noise wash over him. Panic fire erupted immediately. Long, sweeping bursts from M16s and the M60 team. They weren't aiming at anything. They were firing at fear. He watched a muzzle flash deeper in the brush. Just one. Calm, controlled. Waiting for a rifle barrel to show or a boot to shift. That wasn't random fire. That was a spotter marking range, confirming angles. A professional. "Keep shooting!" someone screamed. Rourke didn't move. He closed one eye, lined the front sight post against the brief flicker of light in the black-green mass, and exhaled. But before he could take the shot, the enemy flash disappeared, not retreating, relocating. After a final short burst, the jungle went still again, the kind of stillness that made your bones feel hollow. Slowly, the platoon pulled itself together. 2 men crawled to recover a helmet knocked clean off by a branch. Another muttered curses under his breath, shaking so hard he could barely insert a new magazine. The sergeant stomped back through the line, face red with anger. "God damn it, we burned half our ammo in 30 seconds. No one looked at Rourke. They didn't have to. He hadn't fired a single round. As they resumed movement, the jokes resurfaced, brittle and strained. "Half-click didn't even bother aiming today, huh? Guys' fingers glued to safe, I swear." But their voices were different now, more uneasy, as if part of them suspected he wasn't the fool. The procession wound deeper into the jungle. Hours passed in heat thick enough to drown in. The canopy turned day into a dim green bruise. Every vine looked like something that could trip you. Every hole in the earth felt staged. At a small creek crossing, Rourke squatted and dipped his hand into the water. It was warm, warmer than it should have been. Movement upstream had stirred it recently. The point man didn't notice. The sergeant didn't either. But Rourke felt the jungle shifting around them, responding, adjusting. They weren't just walking into danger, see, they were being guided toward it. He stood, wiped the water from his fingers, and said quietly, "We're being herded." The sergeant frowned. "By who?" "Someone patient. The kind of patience you only find in men who understand terrain like a second language." Rourke knew the type. He had just met his match somewhere in the trees. By late afternoon, the fire support base felt smaller than it had the night before. It wasn't the size that changed. It was the air, thick, watchful, like the jungle had crept closer while no one was looking. Rourke sat on an overturned ammo crate near the western berm, cleaning his rifle with slow, practiced movements. The rest of the platoon moved with the jittery rhythm of men pretending not to be scared. Someone hammered fresh stakes into the earth. Someone else checked claymore wires twice, then a third time. The M60 team carried their tripod to 3 different spots before choosing none of them. The sergeant paced, muttering under his breath. Earlier that morning, the patrol had returned with more questions than answers. No bodies, no blood, no evidence, just the sense of being watched, ambushed without footprints, attacked without attackers. Whoever was out there knew how to move. Rourke set his rifle aside and looked across the perimeter. The heat distorted the air above the sandbags, bending the edges of the world. Beyond the wire lay a patchwork of tall grass, knotted vines, and narrow cuts in the ground where someone, or many someones, had been crawling close. The lieutenant approached the platoon, wiping sweat from his collar. He tried to sound confident. He didn't succeed. "Intel says we've got a coordinated element in this sector," he began. "Maybe a platoon-sized VC unit, possibly NVA cadre advising." That word, cadre, made a few heads turn. Cadre meant leadership. Cadre meant discipline. Cadre meant the enemy wasn't here to harass them. They were here to break them. The lieutenant continued, voice trembling just enough for Rourke to hear it. "They've been probing other bases. Same pattern each time. Short bursts, quick withdrawals, night movement. Looks like they're mapping our responses. Mapping, studying, learning where each man flinched, where each gun hesitated, who fired too early and who fired too late. The platoon didn't need a briefing to know they were being tested like prey. After the lieutenant walked away, two men leaned against the sandbags, whispering, "You think they'll hit us tonight? Every night feels like the night." Rourke didn't join the conversation. Instead, he watched the tree line and thought about that single muzzle flash on the trail, the one shot fired with purpose. Someone out there had patience matching his, someone who fired only when the shot mattered, a mirror in the jungle. He didn't like it. As evening bled into dusk, the base prepared for another night. Flare guns were loaded, M60 barrels were cooled with canteens. Radio operators checked frequencies twice. The medic pre-laid bandages in rows on his cot, and the ammo count. The ammo count was becoming a problem. The sergeant walked by, grabbing a helmet from the dirt. "Half the crate's gone and we haven't even been ambushed properly," he grumbled. "If they come hard tonight, we're gonna be throwing rocks." He shot a glare at Rourke. "You gonna help fix that? Maybe fire your weapon once in a while?" Rourke didn't answer. He didn't have to. The sergeant walked away, shaking his head, but not confidently, more like a man arguing with his own doubt. Night fell fast in Vietnam, swallowing the world in minutes. The jungle changed character when the light vanished. Shapes blurred, sounds sharpened. The base breathed shallow. Rourke settled into his fighting position, adjusting the sandbags until they felt familiar beneath his elbows. Behind him, somewhere near the mortar pit, a private whispered a prayer. The M60 team checked their belt one last time. The sergeant cupped a lighter with both hands, shielding the flame, lighting a cigarette he didn't actually want. And then it came, a distant crack, not loud, not urgent, just enough to make every man stiffen, a probing shot. Seconds later, another, farther left. Then one more, right flank, not random, coordinated, measuring reaction times, learning who fired too much and who fired too little. The men fired back on instinct, 3 magazines gone in moments. Rourke didn't fire. He listened. He let the chaos paint a picture. The enemy was closing a circle around them, tightening with each burst. The sergeant crawled up to Rourke's position, sweat dripping from his helmet. "You hear that?" he whispered. "Yeah," Rourke said quietly. "They're getting closer." "Why?" the sergeant asked, voice thin. Rourke looked back toward the jungle, blinked slowly and said, "They're getting ready for something bigger. Someone out there is directing this. Someone who knows exactly how to use panic." A flare streaked upward, popping in a harsh white bloom above the perimeter. For a moment the jungle was visible, frozen in silver light. And Rourke saw it. A faint path in the grass, freshly bent stalks, a shadow that hadn't been there yesterday, a route, a plan, a mind shaping both. The light died, darkness returned, and the jungle exhaled. The pressure wasn't coming, it was already here. It began without warning, not with a rocket, not with a scream, but with the subtle tremor of dirt shifting beneath the sandbags. Rourke felt it before he heard anything, a vibration faint as the hum of a distant generator, boots hitting earth, many, moving in rhythm. Then the first explosion tore the night open. A mortar round crashed into the southern berm, spraying dirt and shrapnel across the compound. A second detonated near the concertina wire. The perimeter lit up in jagged flashes, shadows jerking across the bunkers like puppets pulled by frantic strings. "Contact, contact, contact!" the base erupted. M60s hammered to life instantly, their barrels spitting long chains of green tracers across the tree line. The sound hit like rolling thunder, deep, angry, swallowing every other noise. Riflemen fired as fast as their fingers could work the triggers, muzzles glowing orange in the dark. Rourke stayed low behind his sandbags, letting the storm build around him. The jungle flared with muzzle flashes, bursts in short, disciplined patterns. Not chaotic, not wasteful. Someone was controlling the tempo. He lifted his rifle, steady hands moving with the same slow certainty he'd carried since Kansas summers. He searched through the flickering darkness, ignoring the panic fire that screamed over his head. To his right, a private shouted, "We're getting overrun," and emptied an entire magazine into the void. Another man slapped a fresh magazine in with trembling hands, firing before the bolt even locked forward. Rourke kept watching. Mortars continued to fall, each one inching closer to the M60 pit. They weren't random drops. They were corrections, precise, incremental, deadly. The enemy wasn't attacking. They were conducting. A flare arched upward from the base, its parachute blossoming into harsh white light. For a full second, the world sharpened. Rourke scanned the illuminated edge of the tree line. Leaves trembling, shadows stretching, movements choreographed like a drill, but no commander in sight. The flare sputtered and dimmed. The sergeant slid into Rourke's position, gasping. "They're hitting all sides. We're running low already. Jesus, look at them pouring in." Rourke didn't respond. He kept scanning, eyes tracking a pattern others didn't notice. Every enemy burst came from a slightly different angle than before, as if signaling where the next push should go. Then he saw it, far back in the darkness, deeper than the others fired from. A small spark, not a muzzle flash, a reflection, metal catching light, a hand signal repeated twice. Then again, the conductor. Rourke steadied his breathing. The world narrowed, noise fell away, rifle to cheek, sight post rising, heartbeats slowing. Around him men were shouting, firing wildly, praying, swearing, choking on smoke. The M60 team called out desperately for fresh belts. Someone yelled for a medic, the lieutenant screamed for flares. But no one heard him over the frenzy. Rourke saw the figure again, shoulders squared, gesturing calmly, coordinating the tide. His finger found the trigger, not fast, not slow, just inevitable. He squeezed. The shot cracked through the night like a whip. Recoil nudged into his shoulder, firm and familiar. The silhouette jerked backward, collapsing into the undergrowth. What followed did not sound like retreat at first. It sounded like confusion. Enemy bursts staggered. Signals ceased. The synchronized rhythm faltered. Shouts overlapped. Movement scattered. The assault didn't crumble. It unraveled. In seconds, pressure on the wire dropped. The M60 team shouted in disbelief as fire against their position thinned to almost nothing. The men firing blindly slowed, confused by the sudden shift. The jungle, moments earlier, a wall of noise and death, fell strangely quiet. Rourke lowered his rifle slightly, waiting for the counterattack that never came. The sergeant stared into the darkness, chest heaving. "What the hell just happened?" Rourke kept his voice low. "The one giving orders isn't giving them anymore." The sergeant looked at him, then at the wire, then at the men around them, terrified and shaking with weapons half empty. One shot. That was all it took, not to win the battle, but to unmake it. The assault dissolved, fighters disappearing back into the blackness as if swallowed by the jungle. Within minutes, only distant footfalls remained. Then nothing. Just the sound of the bass slowly remembering how to breathe. Rourke stayed behind his sandbags, waiting, watching the same patch of darkness where the conductor had stood. For the first time that night, someone behind him whispered, "Thank God for half-click." But Rourke didn't turn. He didn't smile. He didn't acknowledge it. He knew something the rest of them didn't. The jungle wasn't done yet. This wasn't victory. This was only a pause. And somewhere beyond the wire, a leader had fallen, which meant someone equally patient would soon take his place. The jungle did not retreat so much as it withdrew, slowly, reluctantly, leaving behind the smell of burned cordite and churned soil. Dawn crept in with a grayness that felt older than the war itself, settling over the fire support base like a sheet pulled across a wounded body. Men moved carefully in the early light, not speaking unless they had to. Voices carried too far after a night like that. Rourke climbed from his fighting position, stretching stiff muscles that had locked into place hours earlier. Sandbags were torn open around him, their guts spilling onto the dirt. Empty magazines lay scattered like dead insects. Smoke drifted from a bunker where a direct hit had carved a hole clean through the roof. The M60 team sat nearby, their faces pale beneath the grime. They were surrounded by a litter of spent casings and ammunition belts, burned nearly down to threads. One of them shook quietly, hands still stuck in the motion of feeding a belt that no longer existed. "Jesus," someone muttered, staring at the stacked ammo crates. "We damn near emptied everything." Damn near was generous. 2 crates left, half used. Barely enough for another probe, much less another assault. Rourke didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His rifle, still warm from the single shot he'd fired hours earlier, lay across his knees with a full magazine seated. Around him, men avoided each other's eyes. There was shame in the air, thick, unspoken, and undeniable. Nobody joked about half-click now. Nobody had the energy to. A squad went out on first light sweep, moving cautiously beyond the wire. The grass was bent in long curves traced by dozens of feet. Blood droplets painted a trail disappearing into deeper bush. They found the first body near a fallen log, a fighter in black pajamas barely older than the youngest private in the platoon. A few meters farther, they found the second body. This one lay on his side, hand still frozen around a radio handset. Maps were tucked under his belt, marked with charcoal lines and coded symbols. A compass, military grade, hung from his neck. The man's posture, even in death, carried authority. The lieutenant knelt beside him, flipping through the papers with a grim expression. "This guy wasn't a rifleman," he said. "He was running the whole show." A few men glanced at Rourke. They didn't say anything, but the weight of their looks spoke for them. Back inside the perimeter, the platoon gathered in small clusters, some cleaning weapons, some staring into the dirt, some replaying the night in broken sentences. The sergeant approached Rourke with a clipboard in hand. His voice was rasped by smoke and exhaustion. "Write your ammo count." Rourke did. The sergeant stared at the number. "You barely used any," he said quietly. Rourke gave a small nod. "Didn't need any." For a moment, the sergeant looked like he might say something else. An apology, maybe, a confession. But instead, he pressed his lips together, turned the clipboard over, and scratched out a marking with the tip of his pen. Later, as Rourke walked past the logbook posted near the bunker entrance, he noticed the change. Where someone had once scribbled, "slow trigger, fast excuses," the words had been carved over with a knife, gouged deep enough to remove them completely. The wood was clean, blank, quiet. No one admitted to doing it. The platoon ate C rations in silence. Men leaned against sandbags, helmets off, sweat drying into crusted streaks on their faces. No one had slept. Every sound from the jungle made heads turn, but the tone had shifted. When Rourke adjusted his sling or checked his bolt, nobody rolled their eyes. Nobody joked about naps or slow fingers. Now they watched him the way men watch someone who knows something they don't. Not with envy, not with resentment, but with a reluctant, tired kind of respect. The base had survived the night, but not because they had more firepower, not because they fired faster, not because they were lucky. They survived because one man held his shot until it meant something, and in the uneasy calm that followed the broken assault, the platoon learned a truth none of them would ever forget. Sometimes the difference between living and dying in Vietnam was not how fast you pulled the trigger, but how long you could wait before you did. The report was finished before noon. Enemy assault repelled. Minimal friendly casualties, perimeter intact, 3 lines, clean, clinical. Nothing in it resembled the night they had survived. Rourke sat on the edge of a bunker roof, boots dangling above packed dirt, watching the lieutenant type the last of the after-action details on a portable field typewriter. The keys clicked in a slow rhythm, hesitant, as if each sentence cost him something. He didn't look up when he spoke. "They won't mention what actually stopped the attack." Rourke didn't answer. He didn't need to. The lieutenant kept typing. "All higher command wants is that we held. That's enough for them." The final sheet rolled out. The lieutenant read it once, expression blank. then placed it in a plastic map pouch and clipped it to his radio operator's vest. Just like that, the night disappeared into paperwork. Behind them, the platoon moved like survivors picking through the ruins of a storm. Men cleaned rifles with slow, shaking hands. Helmets were patched with duct tape. Someone was filling sandbags again, shovels scraping rhythmically against the earth. The medic stitched a man's forearm in silence. The M60 gunner smoked a cigarette down to the filter without ever lifting his eyes. No one talked about bravery or tactics or last night's chaos. They talked around it, but not about it. A few soldiers approached Rourke over the next hour, never directly, never fully committed, just hovering near him with questions they didn't quite ask. One crouched nearby, pretending to adjust his sling. "That shot you took," he began, voice low. "How'd you even see the guy?" Rourke shrugged. "Waited for him to make a mistake." Another lingered while wiping dirt from his rifle's stock. Did you know it'd break the attack?" "No," Rourke said. "Just knew it mattered." They nodded, thoughtful, and drifted away again. Word spread quietly, in fragments. Someone in second squad told someone in third. Someone in the M60 team repeated it to a mortarman. By noon, half the base had heard a version of the story, most exaggerated, all wrong, but one detail remained consistent. He fired one shot, the right one. Rourke felt none of the pride others seemed to project onto him, just fatigue. A deep, patient exhaustion, the kind that came from understanding more than he wanted to. In the early afternoon, a captain from another company stopped by to ask how the platoon managed to hold under such concentrated pressure. The lieutenant straightened up, cleared his throat, and recited the official version: disciplined fire, good communication, solid defensive lines. No mention of panic, no mention of nearly depleted ammo, no mention of one rifleman waiting for one specific moment. The captain nodded, satisfied, and walked off. The sergeant approached a few minutes later, leaning on the sandbags with an expression Rourke hadn't seen on him before, something between apology and uncertainty. "You know," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the ground, "I used to think you were slow because you were scared." Rourke didn't reply. "But now I think," the sergeant continued, swallowing once, "maybe the rest of us were scared because we weren't slow." That was the closest he would ever come to admitting anything. As evening settled over the base, the sky turned a dull orange, fading behind distant ridgelines. Helicopters thumped overhead carrying supplies, casualties, rumors. The jungle remained still, resting after its failed attempt to break them. Rourke sat alone near the berm, cleaning the bolt of his M16 with deliberate care. He liked this part, the quiet work, the order in it. Somewhere behind him, a group of soldiers whispered about firing discipline, about conserving ammo, about holding fire until the shot meant something. One of them said, "That's how we're doing it from now on." He didn't turn. He didn't correct them. They would learn or they wouldn't. That wasn't his job. War rarely rewarded patience, but last night it had saved them. Still, he knew something the others didn't. No doctrine would be written about what he did. No manual would list patience as a weapon. No officer would credit the man who waited instead of panicked. The army liked clean solutions. Patience was not clean. Discipline was not glamorous. One shot did not make for good statistics. So the lesson would survive the only way such lessons ever do, quietly, passed from soldier to soldier, whispered on humid nights in foxholes and bunkers. Don't fire because you're afraid. Fire because the shot is right. Rourke tightened the bolt carrier, slid it into place, and set his rifle beside him. Another night was coming. Another test. Another moment where patience might matter more than bullets. And he would be ready, not because he wanted credit, but because discipline was the only thing he truly trusted in the Vietnam War.